Oops. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to start by asking you what your training and experience is. First of all, do you have any education?
Yes, I do. I have a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from Salisbury University.
And do you, after your Bachelor's in Biology degree, what did you do for your career and in further education?
Upon graduating from college, I began working at the FBI laboratory as a contractor. I was assigned to the Federal Convicted Offender Program, which was a program under the DNA unit. During that time, I did that for approximately a year and a half. It was my responsibility to open and inventory and barcode DNA collection kits sent in from federal agencies across the United States. I then became a biologist in the DNA casework unit. I did that for approximately 6 years. During that time, I did the actual testing of items of evidence, so swabbing, cutting those swabs, producing the DNA profile. And then in 2015, I accepted a position as a forensic examiner, which I am still today.
I'm sorry, what year was that?
2015.
So 11 years you've been doing more or less the same duties you have now, is that right?
Correct, yes.
I want to ask you about your lab's accreditation. What is accreditation for a laboratory?
Accreditation is a formal recognition that our laboratory is following a very strict set of standards. We're accredited by ANAB, the American National Standards Institute National Accreditation Board. And our accreditation shows that we have to follow standards such as I have to have a certain education background, how we process evidence, how we store evidence. Every 4 years, we're audited to those standards, meaning an outside body will come into our laboratory, look at my training records, look at our standard operating procedures to ensure that we're following those standards.
And you mentioned your training. So what do you have to do as an examiner there, as a scientist there, for your lab to maintain its accreditation?
So for my training program, I had to complete a 2-year training program. During that time, I learned the science behind DNA testing, and I showed that I understood that science by completing oral board examinations and written examinations. I also then had to show that I could relay those scientific results to a jury by completing moot court exercises. And before becoming qualified, I then took something called a competency exam, or it's like a final examination to show that I'm qualified to perform my duties. During that accreditation or that audit process, my training records were reviewed to make sure that I had the proper coursework, the proper college degree, as well as completing successfully that training program.
And do you have to keep up with ongoing education to maintain your, do you have a certification?
I'm not certified. I'm qualified as an examiner.
To maintain your qualification, do you have to have ongoing education?
Yes, on a yearly basis, I have to complete at least 8 hours of continuing education, and this can be done by attending conferences or lectures or reading scientific literature.
Do you also have to undergo proficiency testing?
Yes, and a proficiency test is a test that we receive from an outside vendor. I process that test like I would any other case and submit that those answers to determine if I'm satisfactory or unsatisfactory. This tests not only me to see if I'm still proficient in my qualifications, but it also tests the laboratory process to ensure that we're getting accurate and reliable results.
Now, as you discussed your work in this case, you talked about your work needing to be reviewed by another analyst.
Correct, yes.
And is that true in every single case?
Yes, in every one of our cases, they have to undergo a technical review in addition to an administrative review.
And it sounds like during those technical reviews and administrative reviews, there's discussions between you and other analysts. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And is that an opportunity for training and learning as well?
Yes, absolutely.
And I assume that training and learning goes both directions, that you're learning and you're also helping others understand your thought process, which may train them as well. Is that accurate?
That's true, yes.
The tools you use, are the tools you use validated?
Yes, they are.
And what does that mean to have a tool that you use validated?
So a validation is a thorough testing of a process or procedure. So before we subject any evidence to testing, we ensure that those process and procedures will work within our laboratory. Based on the validation, we create something called standard operating procedures, or SOPs, and these are kind of like cookbooks. It gives us step-by-step instructions on how to do our process and procedures. And then both myself as an examiner as well as the biologists were all trained to those standard operating procedures and tested to those standard operating procedures during proficiency tests.
Now, you've talked about, I think, a couple of the tools you use. One you call StarMix, is that right?
Correct, yes.
And is that tool validated?
Yes, it's validated both developmentally and internally. Developmentally it's validated by the creators of the software. And then we, the FBI laboratory, also tested StarMix to ensure that we could use it within our laboratory and produce accurate and reliable results.
Now, when you say it was developmentally validated, is that in a peer-reviewed study?
Yes, it is.
And is StarMix used, how widely is StarMix used throughout the world?
StarMix is used in approximately 120 laboratories, both domestically and internationally.
I want to go back to some of the questions that you were asked on direct examination. You were asked about an Exhibit 8.4, Baker 8.4, which is the DOJ Ultra, which is the Uniform Language, what does that stand for?
Uniform language for reporting and testimony, I believe.
Okay. It talks about language that you should use and language that you shouldn't use as an examiner and a scientist, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Now, I want to ask you a little bit about what you do when you have a conclusion, like you did in Exhibit 31. Do you know, let's see, the directive from the Department of Justice limits the adjectives you can use to describe the evidence and the conclusions that you reach. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
And the thinking behind that is to submit the statistical number and let others decide, meaning the reader decide how they want to describe that number. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
So for example, if we can look at Exhibit 31, if you don't mind publishing that. Yes, and that's been admitted, so if we can put it on the screen. And Kimberly, if you could scroll to page 3 when that comes up. Thank you. So item 7, sub 1, is the swabbing from the towel from the rifle. We have the number in a written form in the second paragraph beneath the heading, and then beneath that you have a table, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And the likelihood ratio gives the number, right? That's the likelihood ratio. And that's stated in sentence form in the paragraph preceding the table, correct?
Correct, yes.
The only language you can use to describe what that number means from the DOJ directive is very strong support for inclusion, correct?
Correct, yes.
And the sentence there that says the DNA results from item 7.1 are 1.7 octillion times more likely if Twiggs and T. Robinson are contributors than if Twiggs and an unknown, unrelated person are contributors. The reader can assign whatever value they want to that, correct?
What do you mean?
Meaning, adjective to describe what that means.
Sure, yes.
The adjective you can use is very strong support.
For inclusion, yes.
Okay, for inclusion. All right, if we go to 8.1, Kimberly, if you can scroll down just to make that a little bit easier to view. Same question there. The results are from 8.1 are 30 quintillion times more likely if Twiggs and T. Robinson are contributors than if Twiggs and an unknown, unrelated person are contributors. The adjective you're allowed to use is very strong support for inclusion again, correct?
Yes.
Okay, we can take that exhibit down, thank you. You were asked about formal activity level, and you described this as the lab cannot testify about, or you cannot testify about what action left the DNA on the object. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Does that mean that an individual did or did not touch? Oh, let me ask you this. How can DNA get onto an object?
DNA can get on an object via direct contact, so an individual touching an object. It can also end up on an item via body fluids, such as blood, or through transfer. So if I were to touch an object, and then that object is given to someone else, my DNA could potentially be on that other individual through the transfer of DNA.
And your lab you cannot testify as to what precise action left the DNA on the object, correct?
Correct, I cannot.
Okay. Same question about time. You can't testify about the exact time that DNA was left on an object, right?
Correct.
But there are some indicators that may give some information about how long and the conditions under which DNA was placed on an item, like degradation.
Yes, degradation or the condition of the item. So again, if a firearm, for example, is in a river, I would expect with the water rushing over that item, I may or may not be able to detect DNA. Also, if there's an item of evidence that is exposed to the elements, something that's been left behind 10 years ago, I don't necessarily expect to recover DNA, but something that may have been left yesterday, I might be able to detect DNA.
An item that has been left in the dirt or has been rubbed in the dirt, could that affect your ability to recover DNA?
It could, yes.
Could it also affect degradation?
Yes.
Can UV rays affect degradation?
Yes, it can.
Does degradation keep you from doing your work?
No, it does not.
Is degradation normal?
Yes, it is.
Does all DNA degrade?
It does, yes.
I imagine if it's kept in a pristine environment, it would degrade less than if it's kept in, or if it's found in a less or out in the open. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. You said with regard to the screwdriver, there was some degradation. Did that affect your ability to reach conclusions in this case?
No, it did not.
You said on item 7, the towel, or the swab from the towel, there was slight degradation, not as much as Exhibit 8. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Did that degradation affect your ability to reach a conclusion here?
No, it did not.
You're asked about the PCAST report. You testified that that gave guidance on different areas of forensic science. Do you know what year that report was published?
I don't recall the year.
Do you know if it's been within the last 5 years?
No, it is not.
Meaning it's older than that?
Yes.
Do you know if it's been the last 10 years?
I think it was 2016, but I'm not entirely sure. I would say within the last 10 years.
Let me ask you this. Has the science in your area, can I refer to it as probabilistic genotyping?
Probabilistic genotyping is the math in my area, yes.
The science in your area and in your field, has it developed over the last 10 years?
Yes, it has.
And have there been studies that have made suggestions which have been implemented in the field?
Yes.
You testified about Exhibits 7 and 8, that they both had mixtures. Excuse me. Yes, items 7 and 8. In your testing of these items, that they both had mixtures. And you stated, I want to make sure I understood this. You stated, I believe, that the minor contributor was less than 20%, and that it was actually 5%, the ratio is 5% to 95%.
For one of the samples, yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
Does that mean the 5% was from twigs, and the 95%, that 95% is assumed from the the Robinson?
When I calculated the statistic, Twiggs' DNA profile aligned with the 5% contributor, and Mr. Robinson's DNA profile aligned better with the 95% contributor.
Okay. Same question with regard to 8. I think you said the ratio was 11% from the minor and 89% from the major. Is that Twiggs being the 11% and Robinson being the 89%?
Yes, Twiggs better aligned with that 11% contributor, and Mr. Robinson better aligned with that 79% contributor.
You're asked about Baker 4, an exhibit that was titled Baker 4 365. Do you remember this exhibit by chance? I don't have a copy of it, so, well, do you have Baker 4 365? Put that up. And item 7 is the towel, right?
Yes,
Item 8 is the screwdriver.
correct, yes.
Thank you. You know, it's 5 o'clock. I'm going to wrap up. We can go ahead and take that down. I'm sorry. Thank you for helping out with that. In reaching your conclusions, did you follow the protocols of your accredited lab?
Yes, I did.
And based on your training and experience in following those protocols, did you in fact come to the conclusions described in Exhibit 31?
Yes, I did.
Thank you.
Right, Mr. Burt? And how much time are you anticipating? Right.
You referred on cross-examination to your training and experience, right?
Yes,
Do you agree with this statement in the PCAS report? Experience or judgment cannot be used to establish the scientific validity and reliability of a metrological method, such as a forensic feature comparison method. Moreover, a forensic examiner's experience from extensive casework is not informative because the right answers are not typically known in casework, and thus examiners cannot accurately know how often they erroneously declare matches and cannot readily hone their accuracy by learning from their mistakes in the course of casework. Do you agree with that statement?
I don't. I think experience, they're right in the fact that we never know the true answer. However, my experience means that I've seen a lot of different DNA. I've seen a lot of validation data, so that does help me come to a conclusion.
Do you agree with this statement by that same report? Good professional practices, such as the existence of professional societies, certification programs, accreditation programs, peer-reviewed articles, standardized protocols, proficiency testing, and the code of ethics cannot substitute for actual evidence of scientific validity and reliability.
I don't think I agree with that either. The science has been heavily validated and tested to show that's reliable. Following protocols that are based on validation, again, shows that my results are accurate and reliable, as well as being proficiency tested.
By the way, you said that that report was not authored by experts, but the head of that group was Eric Lander, who is one of the foremost experts in the area of forensic biology, is he not?
That name does not ring a bell. I don't know who that individual is.
You don't know who Eric Lander is?
No, I do not.
Okay. When did you go to school? What years?
2003 to 2007.
You said that STR mix was widely used and that it's been validated. The PCAST report said the problem is it's been validated by the people selling the product, right?
Developmental validation, yes. Internal validation, no. A laboratory that's going to utilize STAR mix has to validate within their own laboratory.
And the PCAST report said that we need validation data not by the people selling the product, but by independent scientists in order to make this reliable, right?
They do, and that's exactly what happened. There was 31 laboratories that came together in response to the PCAST report and gave their validation data on how they internally validated STAR mix.
And then after that information came forward, the PCAST committee reviewed it, and they said PCAST was unpersuaded by those studies. While likelihood ratios are a mathematically sound concept, their application requires making a set of assumptions about DNA profiles that require empirical testing. Errors in the assumptions can lead to errors in the results. To establish validity with a range of parameters, it is thus important to undertake empirical testing with a variety of samples in the relevant range. And they specifically address the studies you're referring to, did they not?
I believe they did, yes.
Yeah. And then lastly, you said that STR mix is widely used, but as I understand your testimony, you didn't use it and rely upon it for your conclusion about twigs, right? The software told you there was no support there for including them, and you ignored it and decided otherwise, correct?
I did not ignore it. Again, given the type of sample, it was an elimination sample. I compared that individual to the DNA profile that I developed and determined that I could conclude that I could utilize him as an elimination sample.
You said your laboratory was accredited, correct?
Yes.
But you're aware that in 2004, the Inspector General did a comprehensive audit of your laboratory and published a report called the FBI DNA Laboratory Report, a review of protocol and practice vulnerabilities, which found a number of errors in the way that your lab does testing, correct?
Objection. The 2004 study is hardly relevant to this proceeding 22 years later.
It's relevant because he's relying on accreditation to somehow say that these results are valid. This lab was accredited when this study was done.
I'll allow this single question. She may respond, so I'm overruling the objection, and then we'll continue to move forward.
You're aware of that study, right?
No, I'm not.
Okay, thank you, that's all I have.
All right. Anything further for this witness?
Yes, I think there's one follow-up that needs to be asked. You were asked that, or you testified that you never know the true answer with field work, correct?
Correct, yes.
And that's compared to ground truth studies where you do know the true answer and you can compare the conclusions that analysts draw with the true answer, the ground truth answer that is the basis of the study. Is that right?
Yes, and that is what our validation is.
Your validation actually studies is a ground truth test in essence.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further for this witness?
Thank you.
May this witness be excused.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Ms. Baker. You may step down.
Thank you.
All right. Well, does either party need the benefit of the record before we go into recess?
No, Judge.
All right, having both parties say no, we'll go ahead and be adjourned until tomorrow at 1 p.m. We do not have morning court for this proceeding, and we'll start up at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Court is in recess.